All right, good morning. I'd like to call the meeting to order and acknowledge that we're in Treaty 1 territory, the home and traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, Innu Cree, and Dakota peoples, and in the national homeland of the Red River Métis. Our drinking water comes from Shoal Lake 40 First Nation in Treaty 3 territory. My name is Neil Harden. I'm chairing today's panel. With me via Zoom are Michelle Duncan and Linda Schultz. The assessors today are Jonathan Spacek and Ryan Valderrama, and the administrative personnel is Zachary Mohan. We will be hearing applications for revision of the assessment rule in accordance with the Municipal Assessment Act. The matters for which revision is requested have been described in each application, and we will limit discussion to those matters. The statements that are made at this hearing are sworn testimony, and anyone speaking to the matters must be sworn in. Be advised that comparisons of assessments of properties are not considered evidence of market value by the board. The board is appointed annually by council and is independent of it in the city administration. It makes its decisions on the basis of the evidence provided at this hearing and issues a written order that will be mailed to all parties as soon as possible. Please note that the board's decisions with respect to an application may be appealed to the Manitoba Municipal Board if the matter pertains to assessed value or classification, or to the Court of King's Bench for the matter pertains to the application of exemptions from taxation. Should you wish to appeal, information how to do so will be included with the board's order. With respect to the hearing process, I will confirm the points of appeal with your property to be addressed with each applicant following the swearing in. We'll then have the assessor's testimony followed by questions the applicant may have, and the applicant's testimony followed by questions. Each side will have an opportunity to summarize if they wish. Once all the evidence about an application has been brought forward, the applicant may leave. The process will repeat for each item on the docket today. The session will close after all the applications have been heard, and the board will deliberate in private and make its decisions. You'll receive the board's decision by registered mail as soon as possible. As information, all public hearings are live streamed, recorded, and will be part of the public record. We will be hearing items 1 through 4 and number 8 on our docket today. Mr. Mohan, please affirm the assessor's and applicant's testimony.
First, Mr. Chair. We'll start with Mr. Spacek. Mr. Assessor, please state your full name.
Jonathan Spacek.
Do you affirm that the evidence you're about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do, yes.
Thank you. And next for Mr. Valderrama. Mr. Assessor, please state your full name. I believe you're on mute at the moment.
Ryan Valderrama.
Perfect. Do you affirm that the evidence you're about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Mr. Applicant, please, thank you. Please state your full name.
Art Newman.
Thank you. Do you affirm that the evidence you're about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. You may be seated.
All right. The first property on today's agenda is 570 Portage Avenue. So you may begin, Mr. Assessor.
Hey, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. We're looking at file number 24-3561. This is 570 Portage. It's a multi-level, what we have considered as a OFC class building. You can see pictures of it on page 3 and on page 4.
I think you would need to state the roll number as well.
Oh, of course. Sorry about that. We're looking at roll number 1209102900. And we have a 2020.
Were you potentially missing 0 at the end there? I only heard 2.
000.
Perfect. Thank you.
No problem. We have a 2025 value of $3,340,000. Again, this is a a building located on Portage, just outside of the downtown core. We're just west of Maryland. We have a total gross floor area of this building of 46,290 and a leasable area down to 30,069 square feet. You will see on page 2, they've always complied for our request for information. I've included that income and expense at the back of this brief. You'll also notice in April 6, 2021, there was a sale for $3,500,000. When this sale was explored by our department, it was determined it was between related parties, so I don't have it as a straight arm's length sale. and I have that noted. We have, again, as I noted, pictures on page 3 showing exactly where it is. Again, we're just west of Portage Ave where St. Mary's hits Portage. And you'll see the layout of the property on page 4 with some storefronts along Portage on the main floor and then some office space in the second, third, and fourth floor of the property. Again, you'll see the picture of the back of the building on page 5. And page 6, I've included some rental comparables to see how our rents hold up from the model against other OFCs in the area. So I've tried to pick properties that are close in size. You'll see some larger ones to better represent the building as its leasable area of 30,000 square feet, and then comparables 6 through 11, except for comparable 9, or some smaller ones, just to give an idea of what OFCs with unit sizes around 6,000 square feet would garner in this location. So this building is 30,000 square feet leasable, and then it's split up between a lot of kind of 6,000 square foot units. So I've included comparable number 1 at 136 Market. So this is in the Exchange. It's it's on the 7th floor. It's an older building, 14-year lease, 30,000 square feet at $11.75. You'll see comparables 3 and 4 is at 1,200 Portage. Excuse me. You'll see it's a second floor lease. On comparable number 3, we have 13,653 square feet signed in 2017 for 7 years at $14 a square foot. And then we also have another lease in the building signed in 2019 for 5 years. This is 12,899 square feet at $10.50. Again, another comparable 6, we have 1,200 Portage Avenue, 3rd floor. Again, another OFC built in 1972. This is a lease signed in 2021. It's a 7-year lease, 7,340 square feet at $11 a square foot. And I've included some more Portage rents, comparables 8 through 11. We have a range of leases from 3,000 square feet to 55,000 square feet approximately. And we have a range of rents from $10.50 up to $16. So again, I am under the understanding that there is a range of rents for similar space like this, west of downtown, specifically at these other Portage Avenues I've put together that I find pretty similar. Excuse me. Page 7 is our income workup for this property. So this is our model generated value for 2025. You'll see if you turn to page 7, we have 6 units across this building. 4 of them are standard finish office at approximately 6,000 square foot. These are coming in at $12.42 a square foot up to $15.84 a square foot. So the $15.84 is for the standard restaurant portion. You will notice there is a fast food style restaurant in one of the units on the main floor. So that's the 4th premise at 1,380 square feet. And then you'll notice the 5th premise is what we have a storage mezz. So 6,882 square feet. This is a basement space. So from older pictures of this property and prior inspections, the basement is used as, in the past it has had a gym, it has had conference rooms, it is it is usable basement space, but we have it put in as C6, which is our storage mezz. So this is garnering less rent than the main and upper floors of the property, but our model determines $8.67 for that basement space. Our OFCs in 2025 have a vacancy loss of 13%. So OFCs downtown are often larger buildings. These have usually, very often multi-tenant. They have had vacancy over the years, and for that, we try to represent the higher vacancy of these properties and turnover with that 13% vacancy for 2025. We have expenses at 3% for 2025, shortfall at $10, and we have an overall capitalization rate of 7.8%. So again, this is a larger building built in 1962. We have an effective year of 1980, and then combined with the size of 30,000 square feet, it's a model generated cap of 7.8%. If you take all that together, we have a total value on this building of $3,340,000 for 2025. Going down to page 12, you will notice we have a mailer sent in by the owners for 2022. They've also included page 13, some net rents. So you'll see there are a bunch of parking only rents. They're charging $100 it looks like $45 to $100 a stall. This parking lot is located south across the back lane. You'll see that's why we have another assessor here today. We have a separate roll number that is zoned as vacant residential, and it's zoned as VRES 2, but the owner of that parking lot also owns this building, and it looks like they are leasing some stalls. They are renting some stalls per month to some tenants of the property. And then we'll see the rents that are actually in place. You can see at the bottom of page 14, if we all look there, you can see for comparison, Unit 300 Capital commercial real estate. They have a lease in place for 10 years as of 2022, 8,000 square feet at $10 base rent. Um, and then unit number, if you turn to the next page at page 15, we have unit 400 Capital Real Estate. Again, it's throughout the whole building. Leases signed in 2022 for $10 a square foot for unit 400. And I'm just trying to find. If you look at the main 100, this is the bottom of page 15. It's a numbered company, Manitoba. It is the overridden area of 1,380 square feet. And again, this matches up with our restaurant, our standard restaurant premise. And the restaurant is paying approximately $19 a square foot. If you turn to the top of page 16, you can see the base rent in place for that. Restaurant signed in 2016 for 10 years. And again, the last lease in the property that's being reported is 101 Smiles on Portage, and they're getting a base rent of $10 a square foot. But that is what is being reported by the owner. And if you have any questions, that is my presentation. Thank you.
Okay, questions, Mr. Newman?
Yes, Mr. Spacek, feel better. I can hear you're struggling a little bit.
Thank you.
So you and I have had this property before.
Absolutely.
As you note, page 1, constructed 1962. This used to be the building known as the Union Center. I don't know if you're old enough to remember that, but that's a little bit of history. If we look at page 2, you referenced the sale, and you made the comment that it was searched out and it was felt to be between related parties. Did you fully investigate who the vendor and purchaser were? Do you know who the principals are?
No, I don't have that information in front of me. I
Right.
looked at the sale review and what was found by a review of an assessor on these roll numbers,
Okay.
and yeah, I don't have that in front of me, the actual
All
numbers.
right. And then if you look at your page 3, the overhead photos, and I think as you've noted, to the south, there is a parking lot. That's what brings Mr. Valderrama here. But the parking lot services the building, correct?
Correct. There are tenants that use the parking lot, from my understanding.
And again, you and I have had this property before, and you know that one of the issues that's been raised at previous boards is the fact that the parking lot and the building should be treated as a single economic unit, correct?
Yeah, that is a common issue with this property.
Okay. So then if we move along to page 6, those are some of your comparable rents. Your items 10 and 11. 491 Portage. That is the building that is sort of diagonally across the street to the east a little bit. It's adjacent to the University of Winnipeg, correct?
You are correct, yeah. Rice,
Rice Financial Center,
yeah.
as it's sometimes called.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And of those leases in that building, your comparable number 11 is the most recent lease, 6,466 square feet at $10.50 a square foot, correct?
Yes, correct.
And 6,466 square feet is quite similar to the floor plate in the subject property, agreed?
Correct.
So then your page 7, entirely model driven, correct?
Correct.
And your unit, the second one from the bottom, the one that's described as storage mezzanine.
Mhm.
You've seen photos of that area, correct?
I've seen old pictures, yes.
Okay, and you're aware that down there, there's kind of a meeting room, there's a gym area. But the model says the rent should be $8.67 a square foot net.
Yes, that's what it is.
And did you compare it to what the rent roll is showing in terms of the rent being paid?
Well, yeah, I didn't see a rent for the basement. That's what you're asking.
Well, if you look at your page 15. There are a number of rents shown. If you go up to the third and fourth ones from the bottom, it says LLBO1 and LLBO2.
Yeah, the 869 gross.
And right, 869 gross.
Mhm.
All right. Okay, I think those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, any questions, Ms. Duncan?
No questions, thank you.
Any questions, Ms. Searles?
No questions at this time, thank you.
Okay, and I have no questions, so you can begin your presentation, Mr. Newman.
So, Mr. Chairman, and as the assessor and I have discussed, he and I have done this property before. This property has been before the board on a number of occasions. And fundamentally, two issues have arisen in the past. Two, I guess, a little bit different issues. One is the issue of the parking lot and whether it should be treated as an economic unit. And the other is the question of the basement area. Now, I know Mr. Valderrama is here, and I know he's got a set of comparables relating to the land value. You're going to hear me present that the land area and the building should be treated as a single economic unit, and I'm going to submit to you how that should be dealt with in terms of the overall valuation of the two different roles. So with that by way of background, let me move into my brief. So at page 2, I list the issues, square footage a little bit, the rent, the deduction of the parking lot value based on a single economic unit, as I've referenced, and the capitalization rate. So let me address the square footage at page 3 of my brief. The city treats it as being 30,069 square feet. 6,882 square feet of that is in the basement. Historically, it was a meeting room available to tenants of the building. It was an amenity for which no rent was charged, rarely used, was considered to be an encumbrance to the building, functionally obsolete, and no rental market for what is a meeting room in the basement of a building on Portage to the west of downtown. Lots of buildings in the city have similar amenity space. 360 Main at the corner of Portage Main has a conference room on the main floor. It's available to be used by tenants of the building. And the agent who does that property tells me that that square footage is not included in the leasable area of the building. 400 St. Mary has a 12th floor meeting space available to all tenants, as does 155 Carlton. So it's very common. Portions of the basement are now the subject of a lease, 2 units. And I looked at this briefly in cross-examination of the assessor, 1,774 square feet and 3,981 square feet, a total of 5,755 square feet at a gross rent of $8.69. The balance of the basement is not leased, but is available as an amenity. So I'll come back to that when I present my values to you. The rent, city uses an average of $11.81. I now understand how that's arrived at. And probably at the end of the day, to a significant extent. The difference between our gross potential incomes to some extent is a question of the square footage in the basement, but it's also a slight difference in the rents for the balance of the space as well. So the rent roll, which is attached, and I'm going to turn you to it, and it's found at page 27. Sorry, it's found at page 18 of my brief. So this is the rent roll for the property, and as the assessor noted, it starts out with a listing of individuals who have parking only, and the majority of these people are employees of the tenants of the building. Then we move at page 19. You see there is vacant space on the second floor. The entirety of that floor is vacant at the reference date. Third floor, lease for 10 years at $10 a square foot. There was a gross rent for a portion of the third floor at $12 a square foot. The fourth floor, also 5,061 square feet at $10 a square foot. Then we get, and I'm on page 20 of the brief now, we get into all those units that are described with the prefix LL, and that means lower level. And we can see that there's a 399 square foot unit, a 508 square foot unit. Both of those are vacant. There's the 1,774 square foot unit, unit B01, unit B02, 3,981 square feet. And both of those are subject to a lease at $8.69 a square foot gross. Then at the bottom of the page, we see the reference to the numbered company, and over onto the top of page 21, that's a reference to the restaurant space at $19 a square foot. And then on the main floor, 5,638 square feet, and that's a reference to the other tenant on the main floor of the building. So then, and because I've got you in the appendices, so to speak, of my brief, I'll stay here for the moment so you don't have to flip around. You've got the financial statement, the income statement at page 22 and 23. I want you to note at page 23 that the net income of the property is shown as being 36,761 square feet. You'll note above that total non-recoverable expenses of $239,126. If I add those two amounts together, and this is in my brief and I'll show it to you again in a few moments, but if I add the total non-recoverable expenses as well as the net income together, I get the amount of $275,887. I invite you to write that down because we will come back to that in a couple of moments. Page 24 is my spreadsheet workup for the value of the building. And what you can see is that, generally speaking, I have used rents of $10 a square foot, consistent with what's in the lease. For the restaurant, I've used the $9, again, consistent with what's in the lease. For those basement areas that are occupied, I've used $4 a square foot. That's the $8.69 a square foot gross. I've used $4 a square foot. I don't think basement space is going to lease for $8.67. I've otherwise used the assessor variables, but you'll see I've got 29,000 square feet. The assessor's at 30,069. The difference is primarily in those unleased areas in the basement, and there's a couple other little odd square footages here and there. So using assessor's vacancy, shortfall, non-recoverables, and capitalization rate, that brings me to a value of $2,862,000 for the building alone. Keep turning the pages, page 25 of my brief. There's a floor plan, if you will, of the basement area, just so you'll understand what's down there. And I've been there, I've inspected it. Then at page 26, I bring you comparable rents, and you'll note the assessor used as a comparable 491 Portage. Again, that's the building diagonally across the street, a little bit to the east, sometimes called Rice Financial Center. It's where the bus depot was at one time. If you look at the rents there, on page 27, you see the University of Winnipeg on the 5th floor, 8,930 square feet at $9 from January of 18. You see Brandon University, it appears from March of 22 at $12. If you go to page 28, you see the University of Winnipeg on the 7th floor at $10.50, and you see Aurora Family Center on the 8th floor in 6,466 square feet, effective December of 2022 at $10.50. And then there are a variety of other gross leases associated with the property in terms of location, in terms of age, in terms of quality of property. I would say to you, this is a very, very similar property, and it's a good comparable, and that's why I brought it forward for your consideration. Then what I get to at page 31 is the discussion about the economic unit concept. So if you've got an office building in downtown Winnipeg, there is no requirement under the zoning that there be parking associated with the property. People find parking wherever they can in downtown Winnipeg. However, once you go outside the downtown core, and this building is outside the downtown core, there is a requirement that you have parking. And that is why when this building was redeveloped and acquired back in the 90s, this property at 280 Yonge was acquired and converted into a parking lot. And so on this page, you see table 5.9 from the zoning bylaw of the city of Winnipeg. Parking category 18 is for office, and for each 250 square feet of office area, you need to have one parking stall. And so there is a requirement, obviously, for many parking stalls on a 30,000 square foot building, which are provided by this parking lot at 280 Yonge. I then go on to page 32 of my brief. I talk about the decision involving the parking structure at the Forks. And the excerpts are there. I'll come to them in a moment. This property went to the municipal board in 2015. And there was an argument made that the parking structure at the Forks, and some or all of you may have used it, it's 3 or 4 stories, should have no value. Because essentially it's an amenity necessary to the Forks in order to give it value and in order to allow the Forks to exist. And you'll see at the bottom of my page 32 that the board said that the accessory parking, although not required in the zoning bylaw, is necessary to support the property. So for the subject property, accessory parking is necessary. For the Forks, it was not because of where it's located. But the board said without parking, the property won't see the number of visitors that it does, and attracting tenants will be more difficult. The parkade is necessary to support the property and does not have a separate value for assessment purposes. So what the board was doing there is effectively recognizing the concept of the single economic unit. Then at the top of page 33 of my brief, I addressed this concept being known in the context of hotel assessments, and I give you examples at page 34 and page 35. But what happens is hotels frequently need parking to support their operations. Often they go and lease that parking, and or they own it, but it's on a separate roll. And what the department does is it subtracts that value of those parking lots from the hotel value determined through the assessment process. So you see on page 34, page 34 is the assessor workup for the Canad Inns Hotel, Club Regent Hotel. What's important is that you look down at the bottom of the page. You'll see capitalized value, 8.5% is $18,078,000. You then subtract the non-assessable FF&E, furnishing fixtures and equipment at 15%, but then there's another adjustment. And that other adjustment is another roll number, and the adjustment there is $2,414,000. And so what you do is you determine the value of the hotel. You then subtract that adjacent parking on a separate roll, and you get to a net value for the hotel. To be clear, what ends up happening is that $2,414,000 on that separate roll, that value remains there and accessible, but the hotel itself is reduced by that $2,414,000, recognizing the concept of the single economic unit. Same thing at page 35, Canad Inns Windsor Park on Elizabeth Road. Again, down at the bottom, you can see a subtraction of $246,000, which is the parking lot on that other roll. And so again, it's subtracted from the value, but the $246,000 remains in place as an assessment. If you look at page 36, this is a decision of this board going back to 2015. Brian Dupuis was the assessor. What's important here is at the top of page 37, the board put a value on 280 Yonge on the parking lot, which is what this order relates to. But the board recommended that it be merged, that the owner apply to merge the roll with the adjacent building to meet their lease requirements with regards to parking for their tenants. And so I'll say to you, here's the board recognizing this concept. We have tried and asked for a merger. The city will not do it, primarily because there is a public lane that runs between the subject property building and the parking lot to the south. And then the final pages at 39 to 41 are the Forks decision, where I gave you the relevant excerpts at page 40 and 41 of my brief. I quoted those to you already, but it's the parts of the excerpts from the decision to support where we're at. So let me bring you back to page 3 of the text of my brief, which is the text of my brief. And I've really covered all of this already, so I'll be pretty quick. Square footage on page 3, I talk about the fact that we're recognizing the 1,774 square feet and the 3,981 square feet, which are leased, for a total of 5,755 square feet. We're not recognizing the balance of it because that's really an amenity for the building, which is not leased. The rents, I said to you, the city averaged $11.81. The rent roll shows $10 a square foot generally. There's a $12 a square foot rate gross for a portion of the third floor. And then the main floor space with a base rate of $9, and as well the main floor restaurant at $19. As I told you earlier, we took the gross rent for the basement areas of $8.69 and put them at $4 a square foot net. And that creates potential income of $267,890. Then page 4, I make reference to 471 Portage. I've already walked through the rent roll. What I'm saying to you at the end of the day is that we're using $10 a square foot for the majority of the office space. That building supports the use of $10 a square foot. The parking lot at 280 Yonge, I've told you the story about that already. The building can't exist without that parking, and I've walked you through the materials. Pages 4 through 13 are really about cap rate. We're not disputing cap rate here, so we can skip past that. Let's go to page 14. So page 14 is where I talk to you, and I say essentially we'll accept the cap rate of 7.8%, subject to proper adjustment of the gross potential income. And then I talk to you about the 2022 financial performance. And remember, I said to you, looking at the financial statement, which is page 23 of our brief, remember the $36,761 of net income, but there were non-recoverable expenses of $239,000. Add the two of them together, and you get a net operating income of $275,887. And what I want to make clear, because I asked you to remember that number, what I want to make clear is that this includes that $275,000 includes the parking revenue from 280 Yonge. And it will include the expenses associated with it as well. It also includes interest income of $17,567, which traditionally we would remove. And so what I say to you ultimately, my first position to you is take that $275,000, capitalize it at 7.8%, and it's going to get you to a value of $3,537,012. And that's what I say to you is the value of the combined economic unit made up of these two properties. And that's my primary position to you, is that you should treat the economic unit as having a value of $3,537,000 because it picks up all the building revenue and it picks up all the parking lot revenue as well. But you should then deduct the value of the parking lot at $1,006,000. And what that should leave you with for the value of the building is a value at page 15, top of page 15, is a value of $2,531,000 for the building alone. And you could then leave intact the $1,006,000 for the parking lot, and your total economic unit value is $3,537,000. Entirely consistent with what I showed you earlier in terms of how the hotels are handled and the deduction of the parking lot value. Now, I mentioned at the end that there was a sale of the combined economic unit for $3,500,000. I asked the assessor about what he knew about the ownership of vendor and purchaser, and he doesn't know the detail. I'll only say to you this: the vendor was person A, the purchasers were 4 individuals through their company. 2 of those people are the sons of person A, who is the vendor, but 2 others are not the sons. They are unrelated parties. And so they bought the building. And from my perspective, certainly it's a reflection of value at the time. But in any event, I'm showing you how on the economics, it comes to a value, combined value of $3,537,000 less the parking lot, which should leave you with a value of $1,006,000, which Mr. Valderrama is here to speak to. So, and then the very last thing I'll show you is page 24. And that's my spreadsheet, because I told you my primary position is treated as an economic unit, 2,531,000. If you're not going to do that, and you're going to treat the building as standalone, then there's the calculation at page 24 of $2,862,000, essentially driven by the rents in place, which I say to you are supported by the rents at 491 Portage. With the basement space, $8.69 gross. I'm using $4 net for that area. So subject to questions, that is my submission to you.
Okay, questions, Mr. Spetchuk?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the presentation, Mark. My only questions are regarding the parking. Again, I'm not against the theory of the one economic unit. I think, like, so for this one there, can you, just to be clear, the parking lot is strictly used for this building. There's no other residents or anybody else using this lot or for getting income any other ways, correct?
What I will tell you is I am advised that occasionally, if there is room, they will rent some parking on an intermittent basis, but it's captured in the parking revenue reflected in the financial statement.
Okay, and you would agree that if we took the parking bylaw, like, approximately 750 square feet for the leasable area, like one stall per 750 square feet is for office. It might be slightly different for restaurant. You might have to adjust that bit, but the parking lot would require by the bylaw approximately 40 stalls, something like that. Would you agree with that?
Isn't it 200, one for each 250 square feet?
I think that's just for the restaurant portion. I believe office is one stall per 750, unless I'm mistaken. I'd have to look at your brief. I don't have it in front of me.
So page 31 of my brief is the parking categories. Parking category 22, sorry, the one at the very bottom.
Yeah, that's just for the restaurant portion, right?
That's just for the restaurant.
And then the office, you don't have, the office is 18, right?
That's
one
correct.
for each 750 square feet.
I read that as 250.
It's, I believe if you actually, I believe if you zoom in, and you looked at a higher quality, it would be 750. I've had it
All
before.
right.
So with those mathematics, approximately 40. If you make it 150 for the restaurant area, what does it say? One for each without drive-through facility restaurant, one for each 100 square feet of floor area.
Right.
So 16 stalls for the restaurant, they're saying.
Yeah.
Approximately. So say 39 plus. So approximately, we can say approximately 50 stalls of the parking lot, according to the bylaw, would be required, correct?
Approximately.
Approximately, yeah. We're not getting. I'm just, and the parking lot's larger than that, correct? Do you know how many stalls the parking lot has?
I do not.
Okay, so I'm going to estimate it has 70-ish from memory, but again, the issue becomes on our end. You would agree that not the full parking lot is required for this property, like according to the bylaw. It's great that they have the extra stalls, but the full parking lot is not required, correct?
It appears so, but again, as I say, any revenue that's generated is reflected in the financial statement, and I'm including it in my calculation.
Okay, and yeah, I just needed to clarify that on my end, and I think it'd be easier if, for example, this property if they had all these stalls leased out, and it's easier with one tenant building where they have all the whole parking lot leased out to the tenant. It's very obvious that it's fully required, and I think there are a few factors that make this one more complicated. Would you not agree?
Well, I'll answer it this way. First of all, I'm pleased that the concept is accepted. And again, it's one that you and I have debated on multiple cycles already. So we should get it sorted out. But sure, it's a little more complicated in theory. But again, because I'm capturing all of the parking revenue, I think the city, I'll use the expression, is being made whole.
Awesome. Thanks for the answers. I appreciate it. That's all my questions.
All right, any questions, Ms. Schultz,
No questions at this time, thank you.
Ms. Duncan?
Just one. So in regards to the sale in April 2021 with the sworn value, you explained that it's not arm's length and why. But when they purchased that, did they not just purchase that one roll number?
No, they purchased the entire economic unit. So, and I think the assessor said that both the parking lot and the building were sold at the same time for the combined price of $3,500,000.
So that included both parking lot and the sworn value on that
It
sale.
did, yes.
Okay, thank you. No other questions.
Mr. Chair, if I may I ask a question?
Sure.
Yeah, just a quick one, Mr. Chair. Would the zoning on this specific subject property at 570 Portage Avenue be different from the vacant land that's that I will be discussing later on, Mr. Chair? That's my question.
Okay, Mr. Newman?
The zoning is different, but I can tell you that going back into the 90s, the necessary variances were granted to allow this land to be used for parking.
Okay, and I just wanted to clarify earlier, there was a statement, Mr. Chair, that the merging was not granted due to the public lane being present in between the two properties. Is that
One of the reasons that has been explained to me by Brian Dupuis many years ago.
Okay. I think that's all the clarifications I have, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. For the panel members, are there any questions arising from Mr. Valderrama's questioning?
None.
Okay, thank you for your presentation. Then let's move on to the second part of the this is the parking lot at 280 Young Street. So, Mr. Valderrama, you can begin on that property.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everyone. The file number for this property or for this appeal is 24-3562, 3562. And the property has a roll number of 12091024500. It is located at 280 Young Street. That's 280 Young Street. It has a parcel use code of Aviras 2, and it is located in the area of West Broadway. Further down, the zoning for this property is R2, residential 2 family, and it has an assessed lot size of 24,302 square feet. The 2025 assessment for this property is $1,006,000 using the reference date of April 1st, 2023. Or that is translated to $41.40 per square foot. At the bottom of my one-page brief is the subject sale or the comparable sales. The first one, it is located at 236 Good Street. It is sold on January 4th, 2019. It has a land area of 36,216 square feet, and it has a sale price per square foot of $12.73 per square foot. The next one, comparable to, is located at 55 Harriet Street. It is 22,016 square feet. It is sold on August 9th, 2021 for $24.98 per square foot. The third one is located at 166 Scott Street. There's a land area of 12,030 square feet, and it was sold on April 20th, 2022 for $91.44 per square foot. And the last one is located at 1133 Portage Avenue. The land area is 38,861 square feet, and it was sold on January 23, 2017 for $37.31 per square foot. And that's the vacant land presentation, Mr. Chair.
Okay, questions, Mr. Newman?
Yes, I'll be brief, and I think the panel will understand my overall position, and my brief on this matter reflects that. But Mr. Valderrama, first of all, good morning.
Morning.
The 4 comps you've used here, did you investigate what the purpose or the reason for the purchase was?
That information is not available, Mr. Chair. Intent and any purposes of a sale is not available, Mr. Chair.
It's not available.
I
Okay.
don't have that information, sorry.
If I suggested to you that all I did was simply Google each of these addresses,
Mhm.
and I was able to determine that each of these properties was purchased for the purpose of high-density residential development, will that surprise you? Do you disagree with that, that was the purpose of the acquisitions?
It's not surprising. It's not, however, not aware, and I don't have that information in my brief, Mr. Chair.
All right.
Mhm.
Those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, questions, Ms. Duncan?
No questions, thank you.
Ms. Schultz?
No questions at this time, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Newman, your presentation, please.
So my presentation is very brief. Essentially, what I told you is what I told you already, is that it's being used concurrently with the building, and they should be treated as an economic unit and valued as I told you initially. I'll just make one observation about the 4 comparables which have been brought forward. I accept that they are valid sales. I investigated them briefly. And each and every one of them was acquired for purposes of high density residential. And, you know, apartment complexes or condominium complexes as big as 143 units at 236 Good is what was constructed on these sites. There's zoning applications and variances that were granted by city council in order to allow this. So I appreciate they say what they say. At the end of the day, highest and best use is always a consideration. The present use of this parking lot cannot change because it is necessary to support the building. And so these 280 Yonge would not sell for purposes of multifamily development. And that's my submission.
Okay, questions, Mr. Valderrama?
No, I think I've asked it earlier, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Schultz, any questions?
No questions, thank you.
Ms. Duncan?
No questions, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. That concludes these 2 properties. Let's take a break till 5 after 10 and then come back with our final 3 properties on the agenda today.
Hey, Mr. Chair, I just wanted to clarify, I may I have the permission to leave. I think that's all that I have for this docket.
Yes, if you have no more properties, that's fine. Yes.
And Mr. Chairman, I'll just advise that I understand that there are recommendations coming forward on the Corden Avenue properties, which will be accepted. So we will be down to 1.
Okay, have you signed the 15-1 agreements as yet on those properties?
We have not. As I understand it, Mr. Spacek is going to make recommendations, which I will accept.
Okay, so we will have to at least have the hearings and then have Mr. Spacek present his recommendations.
Yeah, and can I say one thing too quickly? I sent Zach the just 2 workups for the rec, so you would have copies in front of you, so I don't have to read everything line for line. I just, from what the email said back, you would have to, it's late evidence, you have to have a meeting for it, so I just wanted to bring that up beforehand or something. Maybe you could talk about it before, I don't know.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much. So we'll take a break till 5 after 10 and then come back.
Thank you.
Have a good day, everyone. Thanks.
Bye, Ryan. Thank you.
Bye.
Okay, welcome back. The next property on the agenda is 611 Cordons. So Mr. Spacek, you can begin.
Thank you so much. 611 Corden. Did you receive the workups, or is that something that has to happen now?
Oh, we have the workup.
That
It would just be
the
a
Rex K.
Oh, sorry, go ahead. Mr. Chair, it just will be an in-camera issue. I'm not sure if you want to address it now or in a couple seconds.
Well, we'll have to agree whether to accept it or not, but I wish the assessor to begin his introduction with the tombstone information.
Okay,
Thank
great.
you.
My apologies.
File number 24-3224. We have roll number 1202179650. This is 611 Corden Avenue. It's a two-story OFS. The applicant and I have come to an agreement on a reduction in value, and I've included that workup to the to Zach, and I was hoping we could get those sent out, so I don't have to read it all.
Okay. Mr. Newman, do you have any objection to the receipt of the new information?
No,
Late
no
evidence?
objection, no objection, Mr. Chairman, and the secretary has sent it on to me, so I've got it as well.
Okay, thank you. I guess we need a briefing camera then to decide whether to accept the late evidence. So can we take a short break for the board to consider? Okay, welcome back. The board has agreed to accept the late evidence. So Mr. Spacek, can you give us your revised valuation?
Absolutely. As you'll see on this workup sent in for 611 Corden, Mark and I have agreed to a total reduction from 1,795,000 to 1,551,000. Again, I used some rental rates that were actually in place and a small adjustment to the cap to come to a value that made sense to both of us on this property.
Okay, Mr. Newman, how do you feel about this?
The recommendation is acceptable.
Okay. Thank you. I'm just writing down the revised value. All right. Thank you for that, gentlemen. We will now move on to 698 Corden. So there it is. Okay, Mr. Spacek, can you begin with the tombstone information on 698 Corden?
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chair. We are file number 24-3222, roll number 12022250000. This address is 698 Corden Avenue. Similar to the last, we're looking at a two-story office building on Corden Avenue. And would you like to view the recommendations full workup, or would you be comfortable with the total value reduction being said?
Well, again, we have to caucus to whether to accept the late evidence. So, Mr. Newman, do you have any objection to the late evidence?
I have no objection.
Okay. So again, we'll go take a brief break for the board to consider it.
Okay, for sure.
Okay, welcome back. The board has agreed to accept the late evidence. So, Mr. Spacek, just give your final value and state what has changed in the valuation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We're looking at a reduction from 2,640,000 to 2,537,000. This is a a reduction in removing the excuse me. There's a small other adjustment you'll notice on the original workup. We have a parking income stream on this property that needs to be removed. So I'm removing that $79,000 in value. And then we have a adjustment to the leasable area and the rental rates. So you'll see the leasable area increases from 12,296 to 15,068, which is more accurate as of the reference date. And then I've included the actual leases in place, as this is a building full of net rent. So this works out to a total reduced value of 2,537,000.
All right. And Ms. Newman, how do you feel about this number?
It is acceptable.
All right. Thank you very much for that. So we'll move on to our last property on 183 Kennedy. I think I'll turn the page here. Let me open the file. Okay, on 183 Kennedy, Mr. Spacek, you can begin.
Thank you so much. We're looking at file number 24-3605. Roll number 120936450000. Moment here. Okay. We have a total 2025 assessed value of $2,121,000. This is a two-story office building considered an OFS in our portfolio naming. We have originally built in 1970 with effective years of 1976 and 1985, as there was a second portion of the building built in 1985. So on page 3, you'll see some aerial photos of this picture. It is it is on the east side of Kennedy, located between St. Mary's and York Avenue. You can see a street view picture on page 4, exactly how it's laid out. On page 5, you'll see I've included some OFS comparables, so I have 5 of them. I've used second floor of 208 Provenchier. This is a 1909 built 1,900 square foot lease at 10 years, signed in 2016 at $15.50 a square foot. My second comparable is 414 Osborne. This is a larger OFS, similar in size to the subject property at 9,000 square feet for $19 a square foot. This lease was signed in 2015. Comparable number 3 is 114 Gary Street. This is an OFS built in 1950, 2 floors, 3-year lease signed in 2020, 12,448 square feet at $16.50 a square foot. Comparable number 4 is 188 Marion. This is a 1986 built OFS, 10-year lease signed in 2017, 10,931 square feet at $16 a square foot. And 255 Sherbrooke, another larger OFS at 12,475 square feet. It has a 3-year lease signed in 2020 at $14 a square foot. Going on to our subject workup is on page 6. You will see our OFS, our model-driven OFS value for 9,300 square feet. We have 3 premises, a standard office, and 1 substandard basement premise. The overall, you'll see these are rental ranges for the office of $1,455 to $1,824 a square foot, and then our substandard basement, 1,500 square feet, is at $4.56. You will see this works out to a blended rate of $14.22 a square foot for the whole area. Our OFS parameters for 2025 are vacancy loss of 11%. Again, trying to better represent the some of the vacancy issues in these OFSs downtown. We have 3% expenses, $8 shortfall, and a model-driven capitalization rate of 5%. This is an estimated value of $2,121,000. I've also included on page 11 going forward the current mailer for this property. So there are some tenants in here. You'll see on page 12, according to the master rent roll, the unit 100, which is the main floor, has a lease in place signed in 2022. It's a gross rent of $27.50 a square foot for 3,669 square feet. And then unit 101 is showing no square areas leased, but unit 200, the second floor of the property, has a lease signed in 2020 for 6 years, and it is a base rent of $14.52 a square foot, and that is a net rent in place. And you'll see the total square footage for the building, 9,869 square feet, is occupied, and our space we have in our system is 9,300 square feet. So again, we're just a little under, but if you have any questions, that is my presentation. Thank you.
Okay, questions, Mr. Newman?
Yes, thank you. So as you noted, the building is built in 2 stages. Correct?
Absolutely correct.
And The building has no elevator, correct?
Correct, walk up 2-story.
And if you look at your model on page 6, you're valuing 1,500 square feet in the basement, and this is a multi-tenant building. So on the area you're valuing of about 9,300 square feet, 1,500 square feet is just over 16%, correct?
The math sounds right, correct?
And it's classified as OFS. And I don't mean to be flippant when I ask what I'm about to ask. What suburb is it located in?
Well, our OFS classification is just now offices under 4 stories. So it's not just suburban offices, it's any offices under 4 stories that don't fall into the category of OFA, OFB, OFC, OFD. So in our case, our downtown, you'll notice we have an 11% vacancy on this OFS. That is a office under 4 stories in the downtown, and they often, through a vacancy study, it's shown that the downtown OFSs do struggle more with vacancy compared to 4-story and under offices that are located outside of downtown. So
Okay.
good
And-
question, and I think we're trying to make that make more sense with the OFS.
Right, and I appreciate the response, and again, I wasn't meaning to be flippant when I asked the question, but I really asked it to simply illustrate and illuminate the issue for the board. So the system, the model, recognizes that the building is located downtown and
Yes.
recognizes that there are greater vacancy issues in the downtown office buildings. Is that fair?
I think that's fair, yes.
And but it then assigns a 5% capitalization rate. So let's look at your page 8. I don't see a 5% capitalization rate anywhere on page 8 for anything except the best apartment buildings. So why does this building get a 5% capitalization rate?
I cannot give you a solid answer on why the model determines a 5% capitalization rate on it.
Okay, well, that's an honest answer. I appreciate that. But what the model is predicting, is it fair to say that the willing buyer looking to buy an office building in downtown Winnipeg at April 1 of 2023 would be so comfortable with this property that that buyer would buy it on a 5% capitalization rate? Is that what the model's telling us?
The model is determining a cap rate based on most generally the age of the building, the location, and the size. So that is what the model is predicting, that a 5% cap rate based on this income garnered, with all the other parameters, is giving a total value of 2.1 million, and that is what is estimated being as the the market value for April 1st, 2023.
And do you know whether the model builds separate capitalization rates for what I'll call suburban office buildings really located in the suburbs, as opposed to what's classified as suburban that are located downtown?
Yeah, I honestly, it's a good question. I can't clarify the exacts of this capitalization rate based on like the monitor parameters. I don't have it in front of me. I'm not sure.
You would agree with me that this building, we've discussed it doesn't have elevator, but you would agree with me that it has no other amenities that some office buildings will sometimes have?
Yeah, I would agree.
And you would agree with me that In terms of its attractiveness, it's what I would call an ordinary building at best. It's not a
Yeah.
trophy building in terms of its style or attractiveness.
I would agree. It looks like a building built in 1970s, and not much has changed.
Okay, and its tenancies are small local tenants, small businesses?
Yep.
And it's not national or international tenants?
I would agree with that.
And okay, those are my questions. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Duncan, any questions?
No questions, thank you.
Ms. Schultz, any questions?
No questions, thank you.
Okay, so Mr. Newman, you can begin your presentation then.
Okay, so the focus of my presentation is going to be capitalization rate. I'll touch upon the rent briefly because we're not very far apart at all. So it's really cap rate that's the issue here. So if you go to page 2 of my brief, you know, I recite the background facts. I mention that there's 1,500 square feet in the basement. It's a multi-tenant property, and arguably this should not even be included in a multi-tenant building like this. But leaving that aside, on terms of the rental rate, the assessor has got a rental rate of a gross potential income rather of 132,323. When I take the rents in place, I'm at 130,976. So we are under $1,400 apart in terms of the rents. So let's go to page 3. What's a capitalization rate? It's the required return or acceptable rate of return on an investment, and it's influenced by 3 items: the risk, the expectations for appreciation, and the required returns or available returns in other investment vehicles. So as we go into the 2021 timeframe and coming up to the 2023 reference date, there's much reporting about vacancies in downtown Winnipeg, and you see me comment on that for a number of pages. Of course, vacancy concerns do impact risk, and they impact the investor's perception of the quality of the investment. And, you know, without wishing to overstate this or be overly dramatic, I would say to you that the downtown Winnipeg office economy is sick. It's got problems, and all the buildings in downtown Winnipeg suffer from those problems. And a part of what led to it, frankly, is the opening of True North Square in approximately 2018. And what it did is it set off a series of dominoes where people could move up in terms of quality of building. They did. That created vacancy in the similar but somewhat lesser quality buildings at the corner of Portage and Main. Those tenants could suddenly negotiate better deals. And it just triggered a domino effect all the way down the line where the lesser quality buildings began to lose tenants to the slightly better buildings who were facing vacancy because they needed tenants and they were prepared to cut them good deals. So the investor expectation of the economic climate for office buildings is not good at April 1 of 2023. Investor sentiment always impacts, and I'm at page 6 now. Investor sentiment and expectations always impacts capitalization rates. It also impacts capitalization rates that at April 1 of 2023, you or I or anybody else who had a little bit of money could walk into a bank or a credit union and get a GIC north of 5%, well north of 5%. And yet the model suggests that faced with the risk of a sick downtown office economy, that I, as an investor, buying this ordinary building without an elevator, built in the 70s, looking like it's built in the 70s, would rather buy this building at a 5% cap than buy a whole variety of other things, which would provide greater safety and a greater investment return. And that's really me saying to you, dress it up however you want. This is just not a 5% cap rate building. Now, I've been around a long time, as some of you know, and over the years, I've seen that the model seems to tie itself to square footage of buildings. And the model seems to have this perception that if square footage is under a certain level, then there's less risk and the investor will pay more. I saw this with banks for years. The cutoff point was 5,000 square feet, and there was a 1% difference in cap rate for a bank or credit union under 5,000 square feet as compared to over 5,000 square feet. Made no sense whatsoever, but that's what the model perceived. And I kind of think that's what's happening here. The model is looking at the size of the building and saying low cap rate. And yet there's absolutely no evidence to support that. And indeed, all the evidence supports the fact that there is much, much greater risk. So at page 7 of my brief, I reference, there's a heading, office buildings, COVID capitalization rates, and I reference the descriptions that the brokers provide of buildings, and the Class A buildings and the Class B buildings, both downtown and suburban. And I think it should be obvious that this building is not a Class A, and this building is not a Class B office building. It is less than that. At page 9, I talk about quality and strength of covenant. As the assessor has acknowledged, the occupants of this building are going to be small local tenants. Small local tenants frequently are not as sound financially. That creates greater risk of tenant failure. That creates greater risk to an investor. Office buildings have become such a difficult use. At page 10 of my brief, I reference the fact that a number of office buildings in downtown Winnipeg are being converted, at least in part, into residential. 433 Main is an example of that. 175 Carlton is another example of that. At the end of the day, when I'm an investor, I look at a building and I say to myself, what do I like about it? What's good about it? What gives me comfort in terms of making an investment? And these are the attributes of buildings section that I have at page 10 of my brief. And so when I talk about quality of tenancy, national, international, as opposed to small local, clearly this is small local. The nature of the tenant mix, it's small. Location, it's on a side street in downtown Winnipeg. The quality of the site is ordinary. The quality of the development is, as the assessor puts it, it looks like a 1970s building. The neighborhood demographics, I'll say to you that there's lots of issues in downtown Winnipeg, homelessness, safety, but there's also lots of issues in downtown Winnipeg. Look around you as you drive through downtown Winnipeg. What do you see? A lot of parking lots. Why do you see a lot of parking lots? They've been there forever. Why? Because there's no demand. There's such limited demand in downtown Winnipeg that people stay with parking lots. Quality of covenant, not high. Amenities in the building, none. Parking, well, there's nearby parking, of course, from all these surface lots I've talked about. Elevators, none. Barrier-free access to the upper floors, none, because there's no elevators. Strength of covenant, no good. I mentioned that already. So at the end of the day, you have to figure out where you're going to put this building in the spectrum of buildings. And the model would say, put it as being a better building. And look at page 12 now. And here I've got the charts that the assessor puts in his brief. I've got the April 1, 21 reference date chart, and I've got the April 1, 23 reference date chart. A AA office building, the absolute best office building in Winnipeg. And remember, there were no AA's buildings in the 2021 cycle assessment, but a AA office building is a 5.9 cap. An A building at the 20th percentile is 6.5. A B building is 7. Why the heck does anybody think a downtown office building like this should be 5%? So what I say to you ultimately is that this is a lesser quality building in a lesser quality location. and it should attract a lesser quality rating, and therefore it should attract a higher capitalization rate. And I'm ultimately suggesting that the capitalization rate should be 7%. And if you look to page 19 of my brief, you'll see that I've used the actual rents in place, which again, 130,976 of GPI compared to the assessor's 132,323, less than $1,400 difference. I've used all the other assessor variables, but I've increased the capitalization rate to 7%. This is simply not a 5% cap rate building. It's a poor quality building compared to the spectrum of downtown buildings. It should get a higher cap rate. That's my submission, open to questions.
Any questions, Mr. Spacek?
I have no questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Ms. Schultz,
No questions, thank you.
Ms. Duncan,
Just, had you considered putting any comparables to the subject property into your presentation?
Do you mean in terms of rents, or do you mean in terms of cap rates?
In returns of both, I guess, is something that's off the central downtown side street, like you had mentioned, just not as desirable, you know, from the building size standpoint.
So in terms of the rents, our rents were very close, and so that's why I said it's really 6 of one, half dozen of another there. In terms of the cap rates, candidly, it's difficult to find small buildings selling in downtown Winnipeg.
Makes sense. Thank you. I was just curious. Thank you.
okay, and I have no questions that remain. So I think this is the final property on the schedule today, and the hearing is now adjourned. So thank you, gentlemen, for your very capable presentations.
Hey,
Good
thank you,
morning to
everyone.
the panel. Thank you.
Have a great day,
Thank
all.
you. Okay,